Welcome. This is Alexia Hudson-Ward, the editor-in-chief of Toward Inclusive Excellence, or TIE for short, a multimedia blog hosted by Choice, a publishing unit of the Association of College and Research Libraries, a division of the American Library Association. We explore equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility issues that affect the higher education community. Among the goals of this channel is the development of a pool of knowledge and actionable resources for information professionals, undergraduates, faculty of all disciplines, campus staff, and administrators at every level seeking to understand racism and discrimination from new perspectives and to promote social justice on their campuses and within their communities. We are excited to welcome you to our podcast series that borrows its name from the higher education academic calendar. Therefore, you're listening to TIE's Spring Semester. Our third Spring Semester podcast features a great interview with author Kaija Langley, NAACP Image Award nominated author of a delightful children's book entitled When Langston Dances, which tells the story of a young Black boy who is inspired to dance after seeing the Alvin Ailey Dance Company perform. Luckily, Langston's community cheers him on. Kaija Langley was born and raised in northern New Jersey and currently resides in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When Langston Dances is her debut picture book and received 2-star reviews by Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, and was nominated for a 53rd NAACP Image Award in the Outstanding Literary Work for Children category. Dedicated to public and academic libraries, Kaija also spends her time raising money for nonprofits. Her debut middle grade novel in verse, The Order of Things, is forthcoming from Nancy Polson Books in May of 2023. In our discussion, Kaija talks about the need for more diverse representation of children of color within children's books and describes her winding road to success as an author as a means of encouraging others interested in pursuing writing. Now, on to our conversation with Kaija Langley. Kaija, thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Alexia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I understand that you started writing poems for your family and friends at an early age, like I think 7 years old. But what prompted
hmm
you to start writing children's books?
I want to say it's a bit of kismet. I started writing poems, as you said, at a very young age, and that progressed to short stories and little novellas by the time I was in high school. And then by the time I'd gotten through college, my undergraduate, I think I was about 25, and I felt very intentionally so that I had enough life experience that it was time to try my hand at a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I completed my first novel. It was an absolute train wreck, and that was fine,
Kaija,
because
I can't
often
believe
first
that
novels
anything
are.
that you would create is a train wreck, but okay, I'm going to listen. Okay.
Oh, total train wreck, total train wreck. But most first novels are because you're figuring out a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And even when you take creative writing classes and English classes, you understand how to construct a sentence. Constructing a story and all of those elements is a whole nother level of writing. And so it took me a little bit of time beyond that first novel to go to a few writers' workshops, to engage with other authors who actually published books and to get their feedback and comments and revision. And, writing is one aspect, revising is a whole nother animal. And you need to have both of those skills in order to be a successful writer. And so I went on to get an MFA, and I was living in the Bay Area at the time, and I successfully completed a second novel. And shortly after the MFA, feeling pretty good about myself, I decided to go out and try to find an agent, which is in traditional publishing the very first gatekeeper you encounter.
Mm.
You need an agent in order to go out to publishers and editors in the big houses. And for the life of me, despite my big dreams of becoming a full time author and writer of novels, the publishing industry didn't agree. So I could not find myself an agent for the life of me.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was humbling to realize that when you follow all the steps and you do all the things you think you're supposed to do, that the other party does not hold up their end of the bargain.
Right.
um,
Right.
so yeah, so essentially, I stopped writing. It wasn't quite intentional. I just slowly sort of gravitated away from writing and gravitated more towards other things in my life, like traveling and working and developing community and friends. And before I knew it, I looked up and a decade had passed, and I was starting to feel the need to return to writing, to have that creative outlet again. And I was invited to go visit an author who was reading at the Cambridge Rindge Library, Cambridge Rindge and Latin School,
Mhm.
as part of the Cambridge Public Library City series. And her name was Jacqueline Woodson. And the book she was reading was Brown Girl Dreaming.
Yes, yeah.
And when I say it's kismet, it was ironic that I had just maybe several months before started writing a new story, and I was cautiously optimistic about it. And it was what I thought a story about an adult woman who was thinking about the summer she was 12 in retrospect. So that was very clearly an adult novel. However, after seeing Jacqueline read Brown Girl Dreaming and being in an auditorium with no less than 500 middle grade children all grasping their books to their chests so lovingly and all bum rushing the stage when Q&A time came for them all to stand at the mic to ask Jacqueline questions about the book, it sort of clicked for me that maybe the story wasn't an adult story after all. Maybe it was the story of a 12-year-old girl in current time, which would make it a children's book. So
Mhm.
I didn't intentionally go out and seek out trying to write for children, but it became really clear to me that that might be the actual story I was trying to tell.
Mm. Wow. What an amazing journey to get to the place
Mhm,
of deciding that you wanted to author children's books. And Jacqueline Woodson, who is a friend of the American Library Association, we hold her near and dear to our proverbial hearts. And that is just so incredible that she was really a catalyst for you to
mhm.
think about this shift in a really intentional way. That is really neat.
Yes, yes, and of course she was none the wiser. She had no idea until several years later when I mentioned to her, sort of how this all came about, and she was like, "Are you kidding me? Are you serious?" And I was like, "Yes,
Wow.
I am."
Wow. Well, we never know, who we influence from afar, right? Until sometimes never, and sometimes many years along the way. But, the good news is that she was receptive to that, especially after you talked about some of your initial challenges coming into the industry.
Yes, yes, exactly. And there's something to be said about writing for children. I think authors and writers who navigate the writing for younger audiences are coming at it, I think, from a very different place.
Mm,
Than
hmm
maybe adult authors or even nonfiction authors. I think that they're coming at it from a place of really wanting to connect and grow readers.
mm, hmm
Therefore, they also tend to be a very welcoming and supportive group of writers.
hmm Wow. That is interesting, and and it's funny. All the years I've been a librarian, I've never thought about, how this particular group of authors think of themselves as growing readers, and helping children enter various canons. That's That's really interesting, and it kind of builds into my next question around this. There's so much diversity discussion in relation to
Mhm.
children's books and advocacy among authors like yourself, and also library workers looking for representation within children's books. And in a recent interview, you highlighted the need to celebrate everyday humanity, which I think is so beautiful, beautifully phrased, the everyday
Mhm.
humanity of Black children and their families. So, would you talk about why celebrating Black humanity within children's books is so important?
Sure. We have a very complicated history in America, we Black folks. And, we have and continue to face significant amounts of injustice, regardless of where that lives in life, whether it's at home, it's housing practices, it's education, it's in business, it's in banking, it's across the board. And we would, the media especially, would have people believe that Black families and children are broken or somehow less than,
Yeah.
versus showing our full humanity. Now, granted, that's what they do. They sensationalize the news of the day, whatever that may be, but it never allows for the full breadth of who we are as a people.
Hmm.
And you know, when we look at other books for children, I think the latest statistics that came out, I think about 10% of the books that are published for young readers is about 10%. The majority are books that have white characters and or animal characters.
Mm-hmm.
And while there's been a great deal of progress, what often happens, particularly around books for Black children or written by Black folks for Black children, we focus sometimes on the history, the Black history, the
Mm-hmm.
traumas, the
Mm-hmm.
injustices. And while those stories absolutely can create empathy in readers, both within the Black community and outside the Black community, what's also equally important is that we understand that we are a multifaceted community. We are also not a homogeneous community. We all have different experiences, but one thing we have in common is that regardless of the traumas and the injustices that we face on a daily basis, we still laugh, we dance, we sing, we travel, we cook, we create, we uplift. We show up in the world in so many ways.
Right.
And those things aren't often highlighted and celebrated enough, especially in books for young readers. They need to see those examples of themselves. I realized maybe about a year or so ago, I was in a discussion with some other children's book authors, and the topic came up that almost the majority of children's books have children living in houses.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really think about that. But then a book came out where there's a little girl who's living in an apartment building. And that's a reality for many, 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 many children, regardless of their race.
Right.
But to always show children living in houses is sending a message that that's sort of the only way to live or the right way to live.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So diversity comes in so many forms, and showing children in situations and in experiences where they are, particularly children of color, they're able to just have a day. They're able to just show up. They're able to just explore. And it's not about trauma. It's not about the history of slavery. And it's not about the fact that they only have a single parent. Or it's not about the fact that they may be living in affordable housing. They are just being children.
Right. Right.
And other books that center whiteness and white life have that variety. You can find a book for everything.
Yes.
Your first day at camp, you decided you like cheese. I mean, just anything. And it is okay because it is understood that there's a breadth of humanity and experience in white culture,
Yes.
and the same thing exists in Black culture.
Absolutely. It's interesting listening to you and reflecting on some of the work of scholars who are now situating this larger conversation around allowing Black children to be children under this larger scholarly arc of Black childhood studies. And it's something
Hmm.
that I've just recently taken an interest in. I'd say recent is defined as maybe the past 10 years around the ways in which Black children have traditionally been represented in
Hmm.
text going back to America's earliest days, up to our modern times. And there are a couple things that you said that just made me reflect on my own experience as a Gen Xer, as a child. And I'll
Hmm.
never forget this one story. And, for our multi generational listeners, some of you will not remember the dominance of B. Walden that then became Walden's Bookstore.
Hmm.
And I remember my mother fussing with my father about some books that he brought into the house for me. And they were all, they were white, like you said, white children in houses. And one of the things that she really pushed back on him about, and we can reflect and laugh on it now, but it's not funny now or then, but it really speaks to the difficulties of having appropriate representation of Black children in children's books and children's literature. But she said, you brought all these googly eye kid books in here. No,
Hmm.
that the books that were out during the time you and I were a child often
Hmm.
featured a distorted version of Black children with exceptionally big eyes. It was almost like, the racist caricatures, exceptionally big eyes, exceptionally big heads, exceptionally big ears. And my mother was like, take it back to the bookstore. And it's so interesting to hear you iterate in such an amazing way around the necessity of centering humanity, for Black
Hmm.
people and Black children.
Yes, yes, and I do remember the B. Dalton. I remember my mom taking me to that store, and you know, at that age, I can remember reading and gravitating to, a lot of the sort of Nancy Drew mysteries
Yes.
and Hardy Boys stuff. And I think at that point, I sort of discovered Judy Blume and all the Judy Blume stories.
Mm-hmm.
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret, and the sort of those seminal texts that people of that generation would sort of remember, but where were the same texts and stories that centered non-white characters?
Right.
I believe they were there, but you had to seek them out. You had to find them, and quite honestly, the way the publishing industry operates, it is first and foremost a business.
Right. Right.
It has historically operated from a belief that black and brown people don't read books.
Mm-hmm.
So the books that they would publish during that time, and when I read some of Walter Dean Meyer's books from way back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
I read those now, and it is very clear that the volume of work that he put into the world
Yes.
were very urban focused, gritty, you know, um,
Yes.
hard scrabble stories
Yes.
that
Yes.
I'm sure the industry people thought, yes, this is the black experience, so we'll publish
Absolutely.
that.
Yep.
We'll publish that story. When Jacqueline Woodson first came out with a book, it was about a little black girl who was living in Brooklyn and got a scholarship to go to a white boarding school, like in Connecticut, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And she went, and she decided that that wasn't for her. So she went back home. But it was a very clear shift in what the industry thought was appropriate for black readers.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's like I said, it's funny, but it's not funny. So my dad goes back to the store, Kaija, and he brings like maybe 8 or 9 Martin Luther King books. And my mother was like, "Dear Lord, like, don't we know enough about Martin Luther King? Like, take those back too." And it
Right.
became this whole thing around there isn't a lot of positive representation of children, Black children,
Hmm.
in the books. And so this is why I'm so excited about your work, because it's a beautiful story. And it's such a lovely story that also deals with some interesting dimensions around perseverance and joy in ways that
Hmm.
has historically not always been represented, in children's books. And I just find that so delightful. I just can't stop smiling through this interview. And so, what are some of the other feelings or emotions that you desire to evoke in readers with your work?
When you're talking about children's literature, I think almost everyone will say that there needs to be hope. Every story, while it can't be, the syrupy movie ending of, everybody rides off into the sunset happily, um, even when you're writing about difficult subjects, there needs to be a sense of hope at the end because we are talking about young readers. We are giving them a mirror into, you know, even if it's fictional, life as we know it, and knowing that there is the possibility of something better, even if it's a challenging situation or a difficult situation.
Yes.
So hope, inspiration, and ultimately empowerment. The thing about Langston is, when I created that story, when Langston Dances is based on my godson Langston.
Mm,
He
hmm.
was the only little boy in a class of girls in ballet. That in and of itself would have all manners of challenges. But in Langston's case, the real life Langston, he had a mother, he had a father, he had a brother, he had a teacher, he had classmates, he had a whole network of people supporting him in doing this thing that was a bit out of the norm for his gender. To this day, dancing and aside from like hip hop dancing, which everybody thinks is okay, yeah, of course, hip hop dancing, but ballet is such a racially stratified form
Yes.
of dance to begin with. So he's bending the gender stereotype. He is showing up unequivocally himself and unapologetically himself. And even when he gets a little bit of pushback from another boy,
Hmm.
he remembers that his mother took him to see an Alvin Ailey dance performance. And there are two nuggets in that, which is about empowerment. The first is his mother had the wherewithal to expose him to something different. That's important. Secondly, because he was exposed to dance and he could see for himself that representation and that possibility, when he bumped up against resistance, were there other characters or anyone else who said, oh, you can't do that or you shouldn't do that, he could say for himself and be empowered within himself to say, that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen that. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing when we think about little children thinking about what they want to be when they grow up. If they want to be doctors or astronauts, you only know those things are possible when you see people who look like you doing those things. Otherwise, you just assume that's not for you.
Right. Right.
So, both the exposure as well as the opportunity to be supported by a community of people who can say, yes, you can do that. I will stand by you in that. I will be a cheerleader and a champion for you in that, regardless of what that is. For Langston, it's ballet.
Hmm.
But, there's so many other things that children can grow up to be that they need those cheerleaders and those champions in their lives. And they exist. Sometimes they're not in your household.
Right.
Sometimes they're not in your classroom,
Hmm.
but they are there. And sometimes you have to seek them out.
Yes.
But, my hope is that both the adults, who are quite honestly the people who buy the books for younger readers, and the children who are exposed to the stories, both walk away feeling empowered and having a conversation starter to share with others to say, look, this is a possibility. Look, you've got a little dancer, a little soccer player, a little
Hmm.
computer scientist on your hands. Here is something for you to share with them to support them in their being.
Yes. Yes. And that is so that's such there are so many amazing points that you're making through this conversation, but that's a real key point around the ways in which children's books can help to plant seeds of potential in children. So they may not necessarily always receive affirming messages or reinforcement around pursuing their interests, no matter how allegedly non-conventional those interests may be from the home, but there will be a
Mhm.
community of support for you to pursue, whatever your heart's desire.
Yes, yes. And also, the messages for the adults in the children's lives, specifically for Langston, I was hoping it was my intention that they also took away that for athletically inclined children, boys especially, that they not automatically just be, shown to the sports store,
Right,
taken to the football field or given the basketball to go head out into the court. It's important that the very cover of Langston shows him in a basketball uniform because, yes, he could play basketball and he likes basketball, but he chooses dance.
right,
That is an option. Everything does not have to lead down the path of sports if you're talking about a boy child.
right.
And so that is a message that I hope the adults walk away with. And it's been really heartwarming that so many parents and dance teachers have reached out to me and said, "Oh my goodness, this
Oh,
book has been, so instrumental and so welcome and so, loved by our young dancers and our young students who just love Langston's story. They love that he, despite getting some pushback, that he dances anyway." It's like they actually do get it. And you know, that's why you write the books, because you hope they get it.
yes, yes. I think I may have a burgeoning arts star in my family with my grandchild, and he has raved about this book. Because it
Oh,
really just seems to have touched him. And so I concur with the others who have been raving about your book, and especially the nomination from the NAACP for an Image Award is incredible for this particular work. And I know that myself and Choice Publishing and the team behind Toward Inclusive Excellence, we want to extend our official congratulations to you on that nomination. That is incredible
thank
endeavor.
you
It's just
so much.
great.
Yeah, yeah, that was such a surprise and such a treat, and just so again grateful and humble for the nomination, and thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad I got my book signed. I was telling the choice team, I said, I don't know if how much longer she'll have space to sign my stuff. So I'm like, I made sure she signed a bunch
Oh,
of them.
I will always sign your stuff. That is a given.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's
You're
interesting,
welcome.
Kaija. At the beginning of our conversation, you shared your path and some of the challenges that you faced in relation to the publishing industry. And I know and
Hmm.
can imagine that there are several listeners to this podcast who are interested or thinking about, I may want to pursue writing children's books, be it part time or full time. And so, what advice do you have for aspiring children book authors?
Well, yeah, now that I am a children's book author, which is still somewhat surprising to me, um, I will say a few things. First and foremost, to be clear about what you're writing and why. Writing books in general, but especially for children,
Mm,
requires it requires you to tap into that inner child that you have. often people will come to writing for children and they think, oh, well, I'll just I'll write it for a younger reader, but you're writing it through an adult lens.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes some time to be able to really inhabit and to return to that place if you're writing for middle grade, say, or YA, to tap into to where young readers are today. The growing up experience has not changed in the sense that we all have our developmental stages that we go through. We all typically go through a school system that operates in a certain way. So
Yes.
those experiences don't change over time. What has changed, of course, over time is technology and how it impacts what children have access to, how much of it they have access to, and what they know. We as Gen Xers, still lived in a time where we called our friends on the home phone, and we felt really
Yeah.
lucky if we had three-way where we could get three of our friends on the phone at the same time.
That was a luxury.
Um,
Yes.
that was a luxury. We turned on the television because if I recall, there were three channels, and then there was public television. Um,
Yep.
we aren't living in that world anymore. But the emotional terrain that all children go through, wanting to belong, wanting to feel like they're seen, wanting to know that who they are and who they want to be is okay, that doesn't change. That doesn't change from generation to generation. So finding a way to sort of tap into that emotional terrain of where those where you're writing for is super critical, and it takes a lot of practice to do. I will also say that keep in mind that writing books is still a business. It doesn't make a difference if you're going the traditional route, which requires an agent
Right.
and shopping it around and finding a house that will buy it from you, or if you do the self-publishing route. Ultimately, it is a business, and it comes down to dollars and cents and marketing and publicity and printing and distribution. So go in with your eyes wide open, I will say. And I will also say that if you're writing for very young children, and by that I mean pre-K to about fifth grade, you always need to keep in mind that you are not just selling your book to readers. You're first and foremost selling it to the adults because they're the ones who are buying the books. That is a hard lesson learned. That is another level of gatekeeper that doesn't exist when you write for maybe even the YA audience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Teenagers buy their own books. Upper middle grade may also buy their own books, but the younger readers most certainly are reliant on their parents, their teachers, their librarians to introduce them to stories, which is why it's so critical that, particularly in library land, whether they be in schools or their public libraries, diversify their bookshelves because their parents may not be doing it, or their parents may have some opposition to bringing in, say, a book about a little boy who decides he wants to dress in drag. You know, that might be problematic for some parents, so they are most certainly not going to put that on their bookshelf. But that doesn't mean that that child should not have access to that book.
Absolutely.
The only way they get access is through their local libraries or maybe their school libraries, and so or other people in their community who are willing to share stories that enhance their reading experiences beyond maybe the small circle of books that you get. We just ran into a young man who just had his first son, and he was so excited. I think his son was maybe 6 weeks old, and he's a new dad. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, we've gone out, we've bought all the Dr. Seuss books." And I said, "Great. How about we start you off with a different kind of book?"
Right.
I said, "How about we start
Yeah.
here?" And so I literally gave him a copy of Langston. I signed it to his son, and he was super excited about it. And because it's so easy to fall back on what has been traditionally so shown and sold as a children's book.
Right.
We have made such great strides, even though we have so many more strides to make, that you can actually diversify your bookshelf now. There are
Mm,
so many more stories that we can give to children who, regardless of what community they live in, we can broaden their worlds based on books alone until they can encounter it maybe for themselves in real life. I love Jacqueline Woodson would often say when she was in other parts of the country that were predominantly white and she was traveling on tour for a book. And a parent might say, that they like the book, but it was a black book. And why should their child read this black book?
yeah. Yes.
And Jacqueline's response was always funny. And I think it was something to the effect of saying, well, you're living in a predominantly white environment. I don't want your children to be meeting my children for the very first time and they be the only black people they know.
Right. Yes.
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 So that's why this is important for you and your family and children and school to read. But and ultimately, writing is such a joy. It is such a wonderful outlet. It is such a humbling experience to create and again to revise and to work in community with other people because no book makes it into the world without a community of other people helping you. That's a community of other readers, editors, writers. And I would absolutely say, as I mentioned earlier at the top of the podcast, that the KidLit community has been overwhelmingly supportive and welcoming and always eager to say, hey, let me help you out.
Nice.
Oh, let me introduce you to this person. Let me open this door for you. And that's not to say it makes getting published any easier, but it does make it a much more palatable experience when you know that other people who have published a book says, okay, try this tack, or call this person,
Hmm.
or here's what I know. It is a very open community, and I think partially that's because ultimately we all just want to grow readers.
Yeah.
There's joke that Jason Reynolds will say, or other very popular children's book writers will say, that they'll be traveling on tour and someone will say, "Oh, you write for children. When are you going to write real books? When are you going to write a real book?" Because of
Wow.
course a real book is an adult book.
Right.
Writing
Wow.
for children is sort of like playwriting, so to speak. And the answer is always, well, why do you think there are people to read your books? They start, I'm basically growing your base. You should be thanking me.
Yes. Yes.
Because that is in essence true. I mean, a lot of writers grow up to be writers because they were readers first.
Absolutely.
They fell in love with reading when they were younger. And that certainly was the case for me as an only child. I read voraciously. My mother was a reader. The
Hmm.
library was my favorite place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, find yourself a community and always sort of keep why you're writing front and center because it can be a long and winding journey. And ultimately, when you get to that place, there is nothing sweeter than seeing your intended audience, which is not the adults, but the young readers, with a copy of your story in their hand, and they are excited about it and they are touched by it.
Kaija, thank you so much. What a delightful conversation, and what a treat to be able to hear your thoughts and to get your advice on all things related to entering new and interesting, diverse works into the larger frame of children's books and novels and literature. Thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast and to be with Toward Inclusive Excellence. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Slam
Thank you for listening to our Toward Inclusive Excellence Spring Semester podcast with Kaija Langley, NAACP Image Award nominated author of the children's book When Langston Dances. I encourage you to sign up for reminders of new content releases and to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your time and support. Be well.